Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whoever is watching. This is Mr. McRitchie, and today we're going to be talking about unemployment. So this is AP Macro. I believe this is actually I have it pulled up right here. This is Unit 2, Part 3, unemployment. So for me, Unit 2 constitutes really three big metrics. We're talking GDP, which was covered in a previous video, two-parter, inflation rate, and CPI. CPI is the number that we're really using, but inflation rate's the topic. And that's another two-part video, mostly because I spent a good half of that video doing what is outside of the scope of the AP exam, but relevant to your normal life stuff when projecting prices forward. And then this, unemployment rate, which is one that is super topical right now with COVID and how COVID has been affecting our economy. And the biggest way it has been is taking one number that had been going super well for us the last 5 years, which is our unemployment rate had been getting lower and lower and lower and lower. And in fact, kind of dangerously low, and we'll talk about what that means by dangerously low today. And then when COVID happened, due to massive business shutdown and a significant lack of our ability to go out and do things, a lot of places that relied on that for business, movie theaters are a great example, had to shut down and lay off, furlough all of their workers. So we're going to be talking about unemployment. What are the different types of unemployment? What type of unemployment are the people experiencing COVID-related unemployment are dealing with? Which types of unemployment are actually kind of a good thing? Because there are a few there. Talking about a couple of metrics that are a little more specific, a little more complicated, but are a better indicator of how well your economy is doing. And then lastly, we'll end with a little bit of a practice question of hey, are these people unemployed or not, or are they categorized in a different type of category? So we'll be talking all about that all today. So let's dive right in. Move that over here and hit this. Here we go. So unemployment, a topic that is super relevant to a lot of people right now, and one that is scary and has a lot of very big, what I call misconceptions, okay? So first things first, in order to know unemployment, you have to understand who we are looking at in the economy, and what group we are looking at when we're talking about unemployment is not the total population. The first huge misconception of unemployment rate is that it is the percentage of the total population. That is not true. If you hear that unemployment rate is 4%, that does not mean 4% of the 360 million people that are in America that are unemployed. No, because that would include people like babies and children who shouldn't be working. That would make sense to use them in that statistic. What they are looking at is the percentage of the labor force that is unemployed. So who's labor force? The labor force of your economy is the people in your economy who are able to work. It's the people who theoretically could be working. Labor laws taken into account there. So like child labor, yes, a 12-year-old could be working, but no, they shouldn't be working. And a 95-year-old retiree could do some jobs, but again, same idea. So who's in the labor force in America? It's 16 and up. It is all employed and unemployed people who are counted in both of those metrics because they're working or they're the other thing, which we'll talk about. But it does not include, it specifically leaves out inmates, prison inmates. Those are not, even though they technically could work, in a lot of cases would like to be working, and in some cases do work, when it comes to while they're in prison, they are not a civilian in the eyes of the law, so they're not treated as such. Ditto for the military, they are not civilians, they are in a separate category. A part of the reasoning for the military one would be countries like North Korea, which have a mandated military service, could then purportedly tout having 100% employment, which is okay, yeah, but not really, not like jobs. Military is what they have. Okay. The first of two numbers, there's only two mathematical formulas that you need to really have down for this PowerPoint, is the labor force participation rate. That is the percentage of your total population that is in the labor force. Basically, out of everyone in your country, how many of those people are actually capable, legally and ethically, of working. In order to find that number, you just take the number of employed and unemployed people in a country, add it up, and then divide that by the working age population. Basically, people aged 16 and up. In America, it could depend on different countries. Then you times that by 100 because it's a rate, so you need to get it from 0.67 to 67%. In America, our labor force participation rate is typically between 65 and 70% in a given year. It just tells us that about 2/3 of our economy actually can be working, which means, very importantly, a third of it isn't. So already off the bat, when we're looking at who's working and who is not, there's a good third of our total population that we are putting aside. And that includes children who shouldn't be working. It includes retirees who also realistically shouldn't be working, but it also includes military members, which is a couple million people in the United States, and prison inmates, which is another couple million people in the United States that theoretically could work, but don't get counted because they are excluded from the labor force. Now, unemployment. So here's the big thing. The assumption for unemployment for a lot of people, the incorrect assumption is that if you don't have a job, you are unemployed. That is not the case. There are two things you have to be. One is without a job, so you've got the first half down. But the second part for you to be officially counted as unemployed is that you have to be actively looking for a job. You need to be applying places. You need to be trying to look. And if you're like, well, how would we prove people are trying to look? Well, one, you can always save files and submit them. And two, you have a government ID number. It's your social security number. It wasn't created for that purpose, but a lot of the times when you're applying for jobs now, you are required to put your social security number in. Well, if there's an online database of your social security number somewhere in the government, then every time it's put in for a job application, it would ping, and ooh, that person's applying for a job. They're actively looking. Do they have a job right now? Click, click, click. No. Oh, they're looking for a job and they don't have one? That person is unemployed. The formula for unemployment rate is the number of unemployed people divided by the total population of the labor force. To be clear, not the total population of the country, just the total labor force, and then again times 100. If there's ever a rate that you're doing percentages, you're always going to remember to multiply by 100 at the end to make sure that you get a real roundabout number. Now what you have over here, which I can move my camera a little bit out of the way, is the FRED data. The FRED is the Federal Reserve Bank in, I want to say it's St. Louis. They have an entire research department that does a ton of super useful data. If you ever go on their website, just type in FRED onto Google, you'll find the website. It's bottom right here. It's fred.stlouisfed.org. You can type in any economic metric and it'll give you data for it that we've collected. So you can see the unemployment rate over the last 70 years here. You've got some peaks, and what you have are these little gray lines. Those gray lines are recessions. Those are periods of significant economic turmoil. And what you'll see with just about every single one of these gray marks is you have a spike in unemployment. And recessions are marked with rising unemployment. So it's pretty one-to-one of if there's a recession, unemployment will be going up. It is basically impossible to not have a recession without higher unemployment. And what you see here is that we've had them quite a bit. I mean, the 50s we had 1, 2, 3, and then 60, pretty close to it. About 10 years there of no recession, then 1, 2, 3, 4, another one in the 90, another one in 2000, in 2009, and then we had gone about 11 years, which is about as long as we ever go without a recession, up until COVID happening. So a lot of economists were projecting some type of economic crisis. Could not have projected COVID specifically, but its general rule of thumb is that things can't go super amazing forever in an economy. You've got to have bad stuff happen every now and then. But you can see here, after 2010, when we start to recover from the recession, you can see that we chip away. We don't try and do one big drop down of unemployment. We're sort of chipping away at it over time, getting to a super low rate. Prior to COVID, we had the lowest rate of unemployment since the early 50s. That's crazy. 70-year low of unemployment rate. We were at 3.2%, I want to say. That is unreal how low that percentage is. But then when COVID happened, a lot of you guys know, unemployment skyrocketed. It picked back up. Official unemployment rate was always hovering around the 14 to 15% range, but there were weird 2-week windows of time where unemployment was as high as 20% in a lot of places, especially in places like New York and Los Angeles, where a lot of jobs and a lot of places closed down due to COVID because of just how many people live there. They had unemployment in the 25% range there. That's Great Depression levels of unemployment. Now, granted, it's not because our economy is in as massive shambles as the Great Depression era was. This is mostly due to the fact that we just literally can't have a lot of the jobs that we would normally have available because we can't actually open those places up. Not because they don't have the money to, but because people won't be able to go there due to COVID restrictions. So you get some scary stuff. Now you're seeing that starting to curtail. That's a lot of states like Texas that I live in, that have become opening back up. Whether that's good for public health is kind of on the fence. But when it comes to jobs and unemployment data, it does tend to help your unemployment data by allowing for jobs to exist again. So, A sort of classic little tricky bit people have problems with on the AP exam is being able to tell if someone is unemployed or if they are not in the labor force. Reminder that if you're in the labor force, that includes employed and unemployed people. So what you're basically trying to say here is this person counted as unemployed, or is this person not counted in an unemployment rate at all, not accounted for? They are left out of it. In order to be unemployed, again, you have to be looking for work but not getting a job for at least 4 weeks. They do like a monthly check of it. So there could be like, a 2-week window where like you lost your job, but you got another job back in like 2 or 3 weeks. Then you were technically at no point in the government's eyes officially unemployed. Also, if you're laid off or furloughed for more than 4 weeks, same idea. Even if being furloughed, which in case you don't know, means that when the place comes back to business, they're going to try and hire you back. Movie theaters are a good example of this. Like movie theaters furloughed most of their employees, didn't fire them, they furloughed them, meaning when they go back to business, they are going to like contact you and be like, hey, your job is available again. You're not like fired, you're just like on temporary leave where you don't get paid. So it sucks, but when that happens, you can be unemployed as long as there's been 4 weeks of it. Now, some groups that are not in the labor force. We mentioned inmates, we mentioned military, but there are a few others that you want to be aware of that are important, like people who are retired. Once you retire and start collecting on your retirement benefits and things like Social Security, you are removed from the labor force, even if you take a job while you're retired. That happens. People who are 70, 75 and retire from one career, but it's been about 5 years, they're kind of bored, or money's running a bit thin on their retirement, they might go and pick up a small job here or there. I'm a teacher. We have a handful of subs in our district that fit that criteria of they're like in their mid to late 70s, and they liked teaching, but they retired and have a good retirement fund. They just want to have a little extra pocket change, so they take up subbing. That's cool. They have that job, but they are not counted as employed or unemployed. They are still out of the labor force. So once you retire, you're out. Discouraged workers. That's an important vocab term. A discouraged worker is a person who has given up looking for a job. They are not currently applying. Not because they don't have the skills, but usually because the market isn't doing super well. It could be the career they're choosing isn't hiring. It could be that they maybe majored in something in college that is not exactly widely acceptable for jobs or widely applicable for jobs, and they are discouraged out of the economy. Doesn't mean they can't ever get back in. It just means that they have given up looking for work for now. And if you're not looking, remember that unemployed needs to be looking. If you're not looking, you're not being counted. So there's a large number of people that fit this discouraged workers criteria that you want to make sure that you're aware of. So even if there's 4% unemployment in our country, there's still a good number of people who are discouraged who don't actually factor into that. Also people that are like stay-at-home moms and stay-at-home dads, those people choose to not have a job. They're not looking for work, therefore they are not unemployed. Doesn't mean they're not having a thing to do. Stay-at-home moms and dads have a lot of responsibility, especially when there's a lot of kids in the house. That's a ton of stuff you have to deal with. So that's a real burden of time and energy, but it's not exactly a job in the eyes of the government. So stay-at-home mom and dad, not in the labor force. And then if you're working off of unreported income, in my class we did that with GDP. We mentioned there's sort of 2 categories there. There is wholesome aversion. Say you mow lawns or you're a babysitter, you're a 16, 17-year-old doing those kinds of things. Yeah, you're not being counted as a employed or unemployed person because the job you have, you are not reporting to the government because most of you guys who do that don't want to get taxed on it. And if you are, what was it spaced out there? Unemployed versus employed. Employed. Oh, you're not employed because you don't actually have a job, and you're not unemployed because you're not looking for work. The other type of unreported income is illegal activity, like drug dealers who are doing illegal work, that kind of thing, sex trafficking, all that stuff. That's not reported income, so that person's not technically looking for a job because they're generally not applying to workplaces if they have an illegal gig. They could, that's a separate thing, but if they don't, then they're not employed. And they're not unemployed because they're not really looking for a job because they have one, it's just not one that the government knows about. A couple of key terms when it comes to unemployment. So that's sort of labor force versus unemployment. Let's get into unemployed versus employed. So we have full-time and part-time workers. This is the government's definition in the United States. 35 hours or more a week, you are full-time. Part-time is between 1 and 35 hours per week of the week being reported. An important disclaimer for full-time and part-time work is the government tracks this once per month, 1 week per month. And some of you guys who work part-time, especially summers versus school year, could have a week where you work 40 hours and could have another week where you work 20. And if the government happens to be tracking it the week that you worked 40, the government, when they're marking off how many people are in full-time work, would have counted you as a full-time employee, even if you're not getting a salary benefit or insurance or anything like that. For the sake of statistics and things like that, if you're working 35 or more hours per week, then they count you as full-time if it's the week that's being reported. So there's some inconsistency with those numbers. When you look at full-time versus part-time work, be aware there are more part-time workers than it looks like because they could have easily just been getting the benefit of the doubt when it comes to their numbers. A bunch of people who count as unemployed, this lines up perfectly with the picture. It's me, the person in the background, but I need a button-up shirt. Okay, who counts as employed? If you're working, yeah, full-time or part-time, you're employed. That's fine. If you're on vacation from work and you're taking vacation time, that's fine. If you're medically sick but still have your job, you're still employed. If you're staying home to take care of a kid, that is generally fine. This is a temporary thing for the fourth one. If you're on parental leave, like maternity or paternity leave, important to mention, that is not a given, in that the United States is one of the few countries in the world that doesn't force businesses to offer paid maternity leave. Not a guaranteed amount of it either, so you could have a job that only gives you 2 weeks of paid maternity or a job that gives you 2 months of paid maternity. It's completely up in the air. Don't actually know. It's up to the individual job, and very few businesses in the United States offer paternity leave, which is like dads being able to take time off to help raise a baby too. So that's an important one to be distinction in the United States, a bit iffy on this. Taking care of a family member temporarily, that's kind of the staying home thing with childcare, but this could be like a grandma or grandpa. If you are on strike, people tend to mess this part up. If you're on strike, you are still employed, otherwise you wouldn't have a thing to strike about. If you're on strike, you're employed. You're still technically employed if you're on strike. Doesn't mean you've lost your job. If you're not working due to weather conditions temporarily, say like snow days at school and stuff like that, teacher's still employed, nothing crazy there. If you're a student with a job, high school or college, doesn't matter. If you have a job, you are employed still, even if your primary occupation is student. If you have a job, then yeah, you count part-time or full-time. And then the last one, the one that actually creates issues for students when it comes to test questions. Most of those are no duh. The last one, if you work in a family business, say your mom owns a restaurant and you do dishes at the restaurant and stuff like that. Even if you don't get paid for that labor, you are also employed. That's the weird where you could not be getting paid and still count as employed if you're working for your family. A farm is an obvious example of that. If you're working as a farmhand on your family's ranch or something like that, and you're 16 and they don't pay you, but you live there and they pay for food and stuff, so there's some sort of tangible reward there, then yeah, you're counted as being employed, even if you're not collecting a normal paycheck. So that family business bit is kind of weird for people to wrap their heads around a lot of the time. Now, let me move my head a little bit. The next big step. So we mentioned unemployment, and I mentioned at the very beginning that there's some unemployment that's good and there's some that's actually bad. The misconception is that all unemployment is equal and all of it is bad. That's not true. In fact, what we have right here on the screen are 2 types of unemployment that are, if not actually good to have in your economy, then at least necessary to have in your economy. So those first 2 types, there's a total of 3 that you have to know for the AP exam. I'm going to show you 4, but there's 3 that you have to know. The first one is called frictional unemployment, and I think of it the way to remember this one, frictional, movement-based. It's you're unemployed because you're moving due to either a new place or a new opportunity or a new time in your life. So when you graduate college and you enter the workforce and you're unemployed for a period of time to try and look for a career, that's frictional unemployment. If you start living in Texas and you're you know what, Texas not exactly for me, I'd like to go live in Montana, big sky country. I moved there and I'm unemployed for a little bit, trying to get my feet set, trying to get my place set up, and I get a job eventually, but I'm unemployed for a month or so. Cool, that's frictional. Or if I pivot careers, I'm a teacher, say I'm you know what, teaching's not for me, blah, 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 blah. I want to go work in stocks or whatever. I want to go be E-Trade or something like that. Cool, pivoting careers. I might be unemployed for a period of time. Great, all right, then boom, that's frictional unemployment. Reason why this is good unemployment is it shows economic mobility. So the important thing to understand is that if you have this unemployment, it means you've got a lot of opportunity, right? You wouldn't go to college to get a job if you didn't think you could get a job with a college degree. So being unemployed for a bit of time while you're looking for that job is fine. Now, being unemployed for like 2 years looking for a job isn't great, but it existing is fine. If you're moving to a new place, start a new career, that means that you believe that you could actually get a career going in that new place and that there are lots of opportunities nationally for you and for your career. That's a good sign. And if you're pivoting careers, that shows that there's a lot of flexibility in what you can be doing in your economy. So having some frictional unemployment is totally good, totally fine. Okay, we should have some frictional unemployment. Now, having like 20% frictional would be bad, but having a little sprinkling of it there, totally fine. We should have some of that. If you have zero frictional unemployment, it means you have like no opportunities in your economy. There's no economic like freedom or mobility. That would suck. You don't want to have 0% frictional. Structural is less fun, but is a necessary thing, where structural unemployment is when your skills become obsolete, when what you do can be replaced or done better and easier by machines a lot of the time. Now, this could be a literal machine replaces you, like think automotive industry, where a lot of machines have replaced people in making cars, or in fast food now, where we have a lot of like self-service kiosks that are replacing cashiers. That's structural unemployment. Those people that are losing their jobs become structurally unemployed. This could also be like industries that stop mattering. So like a VHS repairman. That's super cool that you repaired VHS's, bud, and it was super useful for about 12 years there. But no one uses VHS anymore, and if you're like under the age of like 20, you probably don't even know what a VHS is. Ditto for a DVD repairman or a DVD player repairman. Those are useless careers now. So sometimes those things happen where it's like, that's not great, but necessary. Demand changes, what we want changes, things like that are affected. Ooh, I double scrolled. Okay. The last two types. The third type that you need to know. The fourth one you don't need to know for the AP exam, but it's good to know that exists. The third type is called cyclical unemployment, and this is the one that we're experiencing right now. This is bad. Cyclical unemployment is not good. This is one that you don't want to have. Cyclical unemployment is due to what's called changes in the business cycle. If you're not in my class, you might have heard about the business cycle yet. If you're in my class, we'll be covering the business cycle a little bit later on, in about a week or so. But the business cycle is this sort of wavelength-looking graph of our economic performance over time, where you have these upward stretches, which is when our economy is growing. These are called inflationary periods because generally when your economy is growing, you will see prices go up. And then you have these downturns, which are called recessionary periods or are recessions, or maybe even depressions, which are just more severe versions of that. So if you have unemployment due to things like a recession or a depression, basically a large-scale economic crisis, that's when you have cyclical unemployment. It's called cyclical because this does happen over time. Again, if you looked at the previous graph of unemployment, it was at the very least every 10 years, and in a lot of decades, it happened 2 or 3 times in a decade. So this happens. This is a normal thing for our economy to experience, and we've recovered from all of them so far. So so far so good. Even the Great Depression we recovered from and have become the number 1 economy in the world. So we should be long-term okay. But if you lose your job to something like that, that's cyclical unemployment. So the COVID-based recession we're in, because we are in a recession right now, in case no one's told you, and COVID's the cause of it for the most part, that's cyclical unemployment. So with cyclical, you will see large spikes in unemployment rate in quick bursts of time. And that's not good. You don't want to have cyclical. It's not ideal. Seasonal is the last one, and this one is the least concerning one of this happens, where some jobs stop existing for periods of the year, like construction jobs in the winter, ditto for lifeguard duty in the winter, depending on which state you're in, stuff like that. Where Texas, most of our construction jobs tend to stick around in the winter, but a lot of jobs like lifeguard, things like that, go away. In the Northeast and northern United States, then a lot of those construction jobs really stop existing in the winter, or they shrink up. They lose a lot of jobs then because they just can't do a lot of work in the winter. It's harder to do it then. So that's all seasonal unemployment. That one is not a significant number, but it's a thing to be aware of. This does happen. A teacher in the summer is not seasonally unemployed. I still have a job in the summer. I just have 2.5 months off, which is, it's more 1.5 months off. I have about a month of training I have to do. But that's pretty cool. That's a perk. That's not unemployment. Now, move my head over here. There we go. So there's all those different types of unemployment. There's unemployment labor force, who is in there, who is not. So what should our unemployment rate be? This is a very common question, because you might just hear, okay, unemployment's 13%. Great. What's the goal, though? Like, what's the ideal amount? What should our unemployment be? And that's where we have something called the natural rate of unemployment come in. The natural rate of unemployment is where our economy tends to gravitate to in the long run, meaning as our economy sort of has these ups and downs, there is sort of a trend line. For us, it's generally skewed upward trend line of economic performance. The business cycle shows that. And what that's telling me is that there is this trend line of if our unemployment is sort of right on pace with that trend line level of unemployment, then our economy should be doing well. That trend line is the natural rate of unemployment, basically our ideal amount of unemployment. It's a sustainable number. It is an achievable number. It is a number that we can do and plan stuff around. And mathematically, there is a formula, but it's literally addition. It's the sum total of structural and frictional unemployment, because those are the two that you would like to have, right? You should have structural, and frictional should also exist too, and ideally you want to have that. So those two added together gets you your natural rate. If you just have those two, then you don't have cyclical, so nothing too bad is happening. And seasonal doesn't really matter. No one really concerns about that one. So if you have those two going on, your economy is doing pretty well. For us, it depends on the year. It hovers between like 4% and like 5.5%. This is as of 2019. It was 4.8%. It's probably a lot higher right now based on COVID. But our normal average is around like 4.5 to 4.8%. That's sort of like the goal, and we were past that goal the last few years. But when an economy is at full employment, when we use the phrase full employment in economics, we do not mean 0% unemployment, because I mentioned that would actually be bad. If we had 0% unemployment, we would have no structural unemployment and no frictional. It would mean that we're not progressing technologically or with our demand, and we are not allowed for any economic mobility. You don't want to have 0% unemployment. That's actually a bad thing. So when we say the word full employment, we mean that they are operating at the natural rate. That is, they are at full employment. Like if we said the production possibilities curve, that on the line is efficiency and means that you're at full employment, we didn't mean 0%. We mean this 4.8%, this natural rate of unemployment number. That's what we're talking about when we say full employment in economics. Now, because this is AP Econ, there is also a more mathematically complicated, fancier, better number. That's called the NAIRU, the non-accelerating inflation rate of unemployment. You're like, inflation rate of unemployment, non-accelerating? What the heck does that mean? Basically, they take the NRU and they tie inflation into that. And what they mean by that is, when you have really, really, really low unemployment, that can cause what's called demand pull inflation, right? Demand pull inflation is inflation caused by increased spending in your economy and increased demand. Well, if you have less than unemployment, you've got more people with jobs, with money, with income that can spend. Well, they're going to spend more, and they're going to cause some inflation. So having unemployment go a bit too low can actually cause the other economic problem of inflation. The NAIRU basically tells us, okay, if you're in this wheelhouse of unemployment, you won't have any inflation as a result of it. So basically, it's as low as you can go without causing inflation, is the idea. And for us, that's basically in this like 5 to 6% range. So a little bit higher than the NRU. Because if you were as low as the NRU, you could actually cause inflation. So if you're at the NAIRU, if you're in that NAIRU range, you'd have what is reasonably low unemployment, but no real downside to that unemployment. Where the downside could be inflation. If you're in this NAIRU area, then you're going to have really low unemployment, but also not have inflation. So if you can sort of maintain that sweet spot, you could be okay. But if your unemployment rate is below the NAIRU, you may see some inflation as a result of it. May is a key word because like the last few years we had very low unemployment and our inflation rate was actually not unreasonable. It was fairly sustainable. There were a lot of more complicated things going on in our economy at that point that helped keep our prices relatively low. Nothing like too shady or anything. Just a lot of complicated international stuff going on that allowed for our inflation rate to stay kind of low. But generally, like a general rule of thumb, would be that if your inflation rate is below that NAIRU level, you should reasonably expect some inflation as a result. So, like, by and large, big picture, here's sort of your short and sweet. Why is unemployment bad? A lot of you guys already know that. People without jobs sucks. Like, morally, ethically, not having a job is bad. It hurts you, especially if your country doesn't have a lot of safety nets. Not having, like, insurance, those kinds of things are obviously bad. From an economic standpoint, though, the net downsides are less production, less spending. If people don't have a job, they don't have income, they can't spend. That hurts GDP. That hurts your ability to do things. Also, if you try and combat unemployment, if you're trying to fix really low unemployment, trying to create a lot of jobs and things like that, you can easily cause lots of inflation. By putting people back to work when they weren't, that's going to spike your spending up in a really short period of time, which can cause prices to go up. So even fixed unemployment can create an issue if you're doing it way too quickly. The positives of unemployment, though, there are a few that you should be aware of. One, I mentioned there's less inflation. If you've got unemployment, you won't have much inflation happening because people can't spend, which means they can't really cause it. So that's one of the reasons why this COVID crisis, which could cause inflation because of the shortened supply of things, the high unemployment rate is allowing for less of it. So that really makes it so we're only having to worry about one major economic problem right now, which is the unemployment rate. It also leaves you more room for economic growth. Remember, we want to have economic growth year to year. Well, if you've got unemployment, you've got a really easy sort of like growth mechanic of, okay, well, let's get like 1% more people working each year. Well, can't do that forever, but it does give you some room to grow if you need it. And again, depending on the type, if it is frictional unemployment that we're talking about, it can show economic mobility, economic freedom. It can show a lot of things that are actually good things. Okay. So last bit, I'm going to make myself tiny and put myself in the top left corner so that you can't have this block out. I'm so small. Okay. So pause the screen here. Try and figure out, is each of these people employed, unemployed, or not part of the labor force? That's the big little mini activity here. Pause the video here. Try and figure out, is this person employed, unemployed, or not a part of the labor force? So just do a quick little quiz on yourself and see if you're doing this properly. I'm going to pull up the pen that I use so that I can mark. Luckily, I don't have to do any math on this one, so it's not going to be like the last video, which took me like 25 minutes to do like the math for each of them because I didn't have the answers in front of me. I actually had to do the math again. That sucked. So pause the video, solve through it, go. I'm going to put that in there. Okay. And unpause the video. So here we go. So we've got a high school senior working a part-time job every night. That's employed. Part-time is fine. Part-time, no problem. A part-time worker is still a worker, even if they're in high school. It doesn't matter. So if you're a high school person who has a job every night, or a job some nights, you're employed. If you go to school but also balance 40 hours a week, yeah, you're employed. You are full-time, but you're also employed. A Marine paid to be a soldier by the Department of Defense stationed in Afghanistan. Military is not counted. They are not civilians, so they are not treated as part of the labor force. So a Marine, even if they're getting paid by the government, doesn't count. Retired woman receiving a pension living in a nursing home. Retirees are out of the labor force. That means you've left labor force. A full-time college student also working 20 hours a week. That person is employed. They count. They're working part-time just like the senior. Retired military sergeant now working as a teacher. They're military, means they should be out, but they're retired from the military. Does that mean they're back in? No. They are retired. Even if you go back to work after retiring, you are out of the labor force. Live-at-home mom earning extra money providing daycare services to 2 other families not reported to the IRS. Think back. What is this person? This person is the not drug dealer type of unreported income. That person's doesn't have a technical job, not a real one, not one where their money's being reported. They're not looking for work either because they have a gig, so they are not labor force. A street pharmacist earning $50,000 a week providing private medicine in unreported activity. Same as 7 from the standpoint of they're not in labor force. Not the same ethically, but same idea when it comes to are they working or not. 9, a public school teacher not paying into Social Security because the state has a separate retirement system. This is a thing for a lot of states, including Texas. Oh, I do pay into Social Security also. I said additionally a weird type of retirement fund. I'm employed though. That's fine. Husband owns a small restaurant who runs the store, but his wife owns the place because she is the lead chef. Working for a family business is totally fine. That's an interesting dynamic, but isn't terrible or a problem. None of these people are unemployed yet. Haven't gotten a single one of them. There are people here who are not working an official job, like 7. 8 isn't working a technical job. 9 isn't working either. There are a couple that are working but are not a part of labor force. That is the Marine and that is the retiree who's teaching. But that's the first part, okay? Second part of this, let me move our camera out of the way a little bit. Same idea of employed, unemployed labor force. Pause the video. And we're back. A worker at Walmart who is forbidden by the company for working more than 35 hours because Walmart doesn't pay for insurance. That person is employed. The situation sucks, but that person is employed. A teacher who just had a baby is taking leave without pay because she used up her annual sick days. Taking time off to take care of a kid, though, that person is still employed. This happens a lot. A lot of school districts don't offer a bunch of sick days because there's so much time off in the year. Ethically, that's a bit on the fence in terms of if that's okay or not. 13, a steel mill worker refusing to work due to a union wage strike. Okay, that person still has their job, though. Being on strike doesn't change that. They wouldn't be on strike if they didn't have a job, right? An auto worker laid off by Toyota in the winter. Okay, laid off, that person is unemployed. If you are laid off, you are unemployed. Worker who got fired is suing the company and will not apply for another job until the suit is settled. They got fired, so you're like, oh, they're unemployed. Wait a minute. Will not apply for another job until the suit is settled. He's not looking for another job. Person's unemployed. Person with a PhD in physics laid off from his very high-paying job at NASA. Okay, sounds unemployed. And is now greeting people at Walmart for $15 a week. Okay, that sucks, but that person's employed. This is called being underemployed. It's when you have a lot of qualifications for very high-skilled jobs, but those jobs are not available, so you have to work part-time. It's underemployment. Someone who's trying to work full-time but is stuck working part-time. Teacher during the line in August when school is out. Still have a job, guys. I'm not seasonally unemployed. I still have a job. It's just time off for me. 18, the adult child of restaurant owners who helps at the store but is only paid with room and board, not a salary. You're like, but they're not getting paid a salary, so they're not employed. Nope. Family business. Still fine. Still okay. Factory worker out of work for over 2 years but actively looking for a job that pays as well as the old one. Okay? He is out of work. Let's keep saying he. We don't know the gender here. Out of work and actively looking for a job, unemployed. Factory worker out of work for over 2 years living on unemployment benefits from the labor union funds. That person is not looking for a job, meaning they are not unemployed, even though there is a only slight difference between 19 and 20, which is that this person is looking, this person is not. That is the key difference. What this table and chart tells you is something very important when it comes to the unemployment rate for us. And that is the unemployment rate underestimates the problem. It's an underestimate. And in fact, you can find other unemployment rates that are a little more complicated mathematically that take into account things like underemployment and discouraged workers and stuff like that. But what you find is that it's pretty hard to be counted as unemployed. You have to not have the job and be actively looking for one. There's a lot of people who don't have jobs who, in your head, you might think, that person is unemployed. They could be working right now, but they're not. So when you see this unemployment data, be aware that it is generally an underestimate of the amount of people who don't have a job but could actually be working. Because you have all of those discouraged workers who have given up looking for work. You have people who are just not looking for it because they don't feel like it, which could be a stay-at-home mom situation, could be a unreported income situation, could be any number of things. And then also that people like military members and retirees are removed from labor force, so they don't get counted even if they are actively working. But that also means they're not being counted if they're trying to find a job. Say you're a retired person, but your retirement money is thinning out, and you need to work to try and help support yourself in your last decade or two of life, and you want to work as a greeter at Walmart. You see these a lot. If you go to Walmart, you see really old people greeting. That's a lot of the times what's happened is that they were retirees and they want to have some way of making income. Well, if those people are applying for a job and not getting it, they're not actually counted as unemployed because they retired. They're out of the labor force, so they're ignored by that statistic. So there's some problems there with unemployment that you got to be aware of, which is that not everybody counts as unemployed. Some groups get removed from being unemployed, and that can create some issues when it comes to the data, and some issues when it comes to us recognizing how much of a problem it is. But all in all, some important things to take away from the lesson are that There's the labor force, and that there is unemployment, and that being in the labor force means that you're either employed or unemployed. And being unemployed, you have to be actively looking for a job to count as that. There are some different types of unemployment: structural, frictional, cyclical, seasonal. 3 of those matter. The last one doesn't matter super hard. There's the natural rate and the NAIRU, which are 2 more advanced versions of the unemployment rate that are a little better indicators for economic performance, and that there are various reasons why unemployment might be good or bad for your economy, and it's more important to know what the number you're looking at actually is made up of than it is just to know what the number is. But that is it for this lesson. That is it for the unemployment rate stuff, and that is it for the majority of Unit 2 for my class. The only thing I have to teach my students left is the business cycle, but the big things were the GDP notes, the CPI notes, and these notes, as well as the business cycle notes, which will be the next video that I put out. So keep an eye on the YouTube channel for that, but that is it for me today. Thank you, everybody. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please leave them in the comment section. If you're one of my students, feel free to email me or type them in one of the forums on our class page, anything like that. But thank you guys very much. Wish you all the best. Peace.